Hi, everybody. This week we're going to dive into chapter 2, which is the ethics and legal considerations of cancer management. So, what are ethics? Ethics are basically what deals with what is good versus bad, your moral duty, your obligation, kind of like where your conscience comes in and tells you, this is what should be done, this is what we are expected to do, and it's based heavily on your values, your principles, basically, and your values. And those are basically beliefs that you develop through your culture, through your experience, through religion, and through science. So those four factors are usually heavy in deciding how you view life and how you view what is correct and what is not correct, what is right, what is wrong. In radiation therapy, the two that codes that your codes and rules that your book mentions, you have the codes of ethics. These are aspirational. So what does this mean? This is basically a guide. This is meant to show you the type of behavior that you're supposed to aspire to, or you're supposed to display. So, for example, the Code of Ethics for Radiation Therapists, this comes directly from the ASRT. So the radiation therapist advances the principal objective of the profession to provide services to humanity with full respect for the dignity of mankind. So here it's giving you kind of a statement of what is expected from you. Now, when you're talking about the rules of ethics, now we're talking enforceable. We're talking about things that if you don't follow them, there are repercussions for this. So, for example, the first rule says using fraud or deceit in procuring or attempting to procure, maintain, renew, or obtain or reinstate certification as issued by ARRT. So any of that will result, let's see, this includes altering in any respect any document. So if you violate that rule, basically by being deceitful or by lying at the time of getting your license, you are going to be facing consequences for that. The code of ethics is basically what you should aspire to do, which is treat people with dignity, with respect, always carry yourself in a way that you are proud of, and that people would be proud to be you, essentially. And then the rules of ethics are kind of these laws that you're following. Now, the principles of biomedical ethics. So these principles are basically what your book breaks down. It is very important that we go through each one. You're going to have an assignment this week that is all about defining a whole lot of terms. So let's get started. Emotional intelligence. So the ability to perceive, evaluate, understand, and control emotions in ourselves and others. So emotional intelligence means that you're able to know what you're feeling. You're also able to understand what the people around you are feeling. So kind of what I call read the room. And you're able to make an assessment of that before you even jump to conclusions to say. So think before you speak. You're able to assess your emotions about something, assess the patient's emotions about something, or the other person's emotions about something, and you're able to act on that. Emotional intelligence, it's such a strength to have, because as a radiation therapy, you need to know if your patient is coming in a very down mood, depressed because of the diagnosis, or depressed because they lost some kind of independence. Maybe now they're wheelchair bound, or maybe they just can't go to work today because they're so tired. You need to be able to assess that, to understand that, so that you can reply in a way, and you can take care of the patient in a way that is going to make sure that you're putting their needs first, and that you are valuing what they value. So maybe to us it's not so important, or you as an individual, it's not so important that you can't go to work for one day, but maybe for that patient it is. So you need to have emotional intelligence, being able to read the room, understand what your patient is valuing as more important for them, or things that are affecting their emotions a certain way, and you need to play on that. Essentially, you need to use that information in order to care for your patient even better. Now, moral, legal, ethics, and laws. So morality, it comes from conscience. So your conscience, that thing inside of you that tells you whether something is right or wrong. And morality can be defined basically as the fidelity that you have to that conscience. So how loyal are you being to your conscience? That inside feeling, or that those butterflies, or that nausea of like when something's not right, that's your conscience kind of telling you something is happening, or this situation isn't sitting right with you sometimes. And the foundation of law is ethics. So ethics, like we said in the previous slide, is based on values. And then the foundation of the law is ethics. So you're trying to use the values, you're trying to use your experience, culture, science, all of those in order to build sets of laws that people in society are expected to follow, that essentially are good for mankind in general. So the legal concepts are the sum of rules and regulations by which society is governed. So those are like how you could think of laws. These are primarily concerned with the good of a society as a functioning unit. Now, the bioethical principle of autonomy. So here we're going to start talking about autonomy. Autonomy is the right of patients to make decisions for themselves without interference from others. Patients have the right to decide what they want to do and what they don't want to do. We are no one to dictate to them what must be done. They always decide. And then one of the concepts that goes heavily into autonomy is informed consent. Now, this is when the physicians, physicians are required to go over the informed consent with the patient. And this is where they ensure that the patient is informed and educated about their condition, so their cancer diagnosis. The patient has to understand and approve of their own treatment. They have to say, okay, we're going to have radiation therapy, and I agree to this radiation therapy. And they have to participate in their own care. So they have to say that they are also going to sign on to this. It's not the physician taking over them and then basically forcing a bunch of things upon them. No, the patient is saying, I'm going to agree to come in Monday through Friday every day for the next 5 weeks in order to get better. The foundation of informed consent. So informed consent has to be, it's communication between the patient and the physician. It is ethics. So here we're talking about making sure that we are prioritizing the needs of the patient while also serving, our duty to do what's best for the patient. And then law. This is where it kicks in, where it says, hey, the informed consent said that the side effects could be this and this and that. And here I am experiencing that. I agreed that this could be a potential side effect. I agreed that this might not work. I can't sue the doctor because my cancer didn't go away. There's where the law comes in. And informed consent must be secured in writing. So, and then I love this image. It really goes into what are the concepts that you find in informed consent. So you're talking about the nature of the treatment, radiation therapy, alternate care. This could be done via surgery, but the patient has elected to instead you do radiation therapy, or the patient could view pain relief via medications or palliative care, but the patient has chosen radiation therapy. Benefits. So what are the things that you're going to see? You're going to experience maybe pain relief, or maybe it's a curative intent. Risks. Maybe there's risk of fractures, or risk of necrosis in the tissue. And then, of course, any questions that the patient has before they sign this legal document that binds them to agreeing to this treatment. It doesn't bind them to the treatment. We can't force them to come, but it shows that they have autonomy. They have a choice in this treatment. So consent and autonomy in itself can only be done if the patient is considered competent. What does this mean? They have to have minimal mental, cognitive, or behavioral ability to assume responsibility. A child, so anybody under 18 years old, is not considered competent. They are a minor. So the parents are the ones in charge of signing consents and in charge of deciding what the treatment route will be, or what's going to happen with this patient's care. And then, of course, if you have somebody that has a mental disability or a cognitive disability that doesn't allow them to make decisions for themselves, then they are not competent enough to consent, somebody else will have to consent for them. And we're going to go in. All right, so limits of autonomy. Limits of autonomy, we're talking about when is autonomy not respected anymore or not taken into consideration anymore. A patient's autonomy, if they want to harm themselves or they want to harm somebody else. For example, if they tell the doctor, hey, I want you to inject me with X, Y, and Z, and the doctor's like, no, that's going to cause more harm to you. You know, your body can't tolerate that. Autonomy's kind of gone away. We can't just do whatever the patient wishes. Same thing if it's going to cause an offense to somebody else. Paternalism, if it's something for example, like if it's a child and the parent wants to do something that is going to benefit the parent but not the child, autonomy kind of also goes away. Things like that. So there are limits to autonomy. There are points where we don't just do everything that the patient says. There are exceptions to that rule. All right, beneficence and non-maleficence. So beneficence means to do good. So even when it might be inconvenient, I feel like this is such an important part. So we are expected to act in beneficence towards the patients. So to always do good, even when it might be inconvenient. It might be more convenient for me to put this patient in a wheelchair and wheel them to the treatment room. But if the patient is very adamant about walking because they really want to walk, and I just have to offer my support, we give them my arm and we will slowly but surely get there. If the patient wants a warm blanket and there isn't one in my department, I have to run to another department. Again, we are there to do good. We are there to serve them. We are there to care for them. So we are to do good. They are relying on us to make sure that we are doing our job for their betterment, and that we are there to do good for them. Now, non-maleficence is the other side of that, which is to do no harm. This is kind of part of like the Hippocratic Oath, where it says first, do no harm. Both of these terms go hand in hand with being a healthcare professional. This is why we do what we do. Justice. So when we're talking about justice, fairness and equity are maintained among individuals. That's what justice is trying to do. Your book uses the example of the Affordable Care Act. When the Affordable Care Act came into play in 2010, they were basically trying to find ways to make sure that there is justice, there is fairness and equity among all of the healthcare or in healthcare. And what this means is it can't be, health is a right. We all have a right to healthcare. It's not a privilege. It's not that, you've earned this privilege. No, it's a right. We all have a right to be cared for. And what the Affordable Care Act was trying to do is basically for those people that can't afford insurance, we're going to find a way for you to also have insurance so that you can also receive health care. It's not just for the rich. So, they came up with their own way. And that's the example that your book provides for justice. I love this image. I think this image is a great job of explaining what equity means. Equity and equality are not the same thing. It's not about making sure that everybody has the same piece of the pie. It's about giving the people what they need so that we can all be at the same standards. So we don't help patients by giving them all the same amount of radiation for everybody. We say, hey, it's equal. It's, we're being fair to everybody. That's not fairness. There are patients that are sicker and need more treatments, and there are patients that are going in for benign treatments. They're probably going in for a wart. I've treated warts before. So they only get a couple of treatments here and there. So it's about giving each individual, looking them as individuals and not just looking at everybody, and taking in what they need and giving them that so that they can live at the same standards as people that probably don't need as much. But we want to make sure that everybody's able to live in a livable standard. That's what justice is about. Confidentiality. All right, confidentiality. Knowledge that any patient information has revealed to you, the provider, will be held in confidence. So When we're talking about confidentiality, we're talking about not just things that the patient has said to you, but we're talking about their chart. We're talking about their body. We're talking about it goes and it extends to like conversations that you have on the phone with patients. It extends to just anytime that you see them. It extends to when you even go to the hallway to go pick them up, or to the lobby or the waiting area and you go pick them up. You can't say personal information in front of other patients, and not even their own family members. You're not allowed to. You can only share information about the patient with the patient. And every time you want to speak about the patient to somebody else, you have to ask the patient for permission. There is something called HIPAA, so Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act. The healthcare facilities, providers, and employees are mandated under penalty of law that we will keep the patient's health information confidential. So because of HIPAA, we have to shred all of our paperwork. Because of HIPAA, we have to lock our screens when we leave a certain area. Because of HIPAA, our cameras, our room cameras, cannot be facing the hallway. Because of HIPAA, we can't, sometimes there are some centers you can't even yell a patient's name out in the hallway or in the lobby. You have to go to them and say, hey, so Mr. Jones, will you please follow me? So it truly is a very important law, and it's something that we have to abide by as healthcare professionals. It is our duty to protect this patient's information, and they are expecting us, it is a huge expectation of their healthcare professional, that we are going to protect that information to the best of our ability. This can be a struggle when you want to be truthful. So the patient's family could be like, how did, the patient could come to you and say, I don't want my wife to know that I have cancer. She thinks I'm here because of a benign XYZ. And when the wife asks me questions, I cannot answer them. I have to say, I'm sorry, I'm not allowed to answer those questions. You would have to direct it back to Mr. Jones. It can be a struggle because you see it a lot in this field, where you see family members or friends want to support the patient a certain way, but you have to respect their wishes. If they want that information to be held in or confidential, we must keep it confidential. This obviously can be overridden when the life or safety of the patient is endangered. So what this means is, if I think that the patient is going to endanger him or herself, I am allowed to call the appropriate resources and inform them of, hey, so-and-so expressed to me that he's depressed. He said this in confidence, but I think he might be a harm to himself. So automatically, confidentiality has been breached, but it's okay because it concerns the life of the patient or somebody else. And confidentiality is meant to be kept between the employee and the patient, so the therapist and the patient, employee to employer, so the patient's information and the therapist. The patient's information at the hands of the therapist and the hospital, and then employee to employee, therapist to therapist. Anything that you talk about, Mr. Jones, with your fellow RTT is meant to stay within those two RTTs that are directly involved with that patient's care. You're not allowed to talk about other patients' information, to not even employees that are not involved, or your family members or anything like that. You cannot speak about patients, their names, nothing when you go home. This is a violation of HIPAA if you do. All right, role fidelity and veracity. Pretty straightforward. Role fidelity, you're being faithful to your role. You're a radiation therapist. Your job is to deliver safe and accurate care, precise care to patients. What I think is trying to say is that you're gonna have certain standards that, for example, that your role is defined by, and you're gonna stay within the scope of that role. I don't want to be, for example, placing an IV if I haven't been properly trained. My job, and ethically, my duty is to do my job, the one that I have been trained to do. As much as I would love to diagnose a patient and say, oh, it sounds like you have pneumonia, I can't say that. My role as a radiation therapist, and I have to stick to the scope of my role, and obviously direct the patient to anything or a resource that could answer things beyond my scope for them. And veracity is, of course, truthfulness. You're always going to act with truthfulness. You're going to stick to the truth. The truth is going to set you free. Um, and sometimes it's not so much about always saying the truth. It's really about wording your phrases and just being a little bit more mindful about the way you come across. You don't have to tell the patient, a harsh truth harshly. You can tell them a truth at all times. You're always honest with the patient, but you can quote, word it in a way that continues to show that you care, continues to show that you're compassionate, continues to show that you care about their health and their safety before anything else. Your book goes into ethical theories. So the three that it mainly talks about are teleology, which is consequentialism. The end justifies the mean. So there are two parts to teleology. So we're talking about egoism. It doesn't apply to healthcare. There's nothing from only wanting to benefit yourself. As a healthcare provider, none of us go into this field thinking, oh my God, I want to just please myself and make sure that everything that happens is for my own good and nobody else is good. It doesn't apply. Utilitarianism, which is created by Bentham and Mill. Now that is where teleology kind of kicks in, which is that we perform the acts that produce the best ratio of good to bad. So again, the end justifies the mean. If we think that basically the majority of the people are going to do better because of this decision, then that's the decision that we're going to carry. Again, these are theories. This is not meant to tell you which one you're supposed to choose, but it's kind of meant to help you break them down and kind of analyze, do kind of internal self-reflection of yourself and think which one of these applies more to me and the way I lead my life. Deontology, so also known as non-consequentialism, this was created by Immanuel Kant. So formal rules of right and wrong for reasoning and problem solving. So there are rules that are set down. Reason leads to universal principles and it leads to universal truths. So it's almost like a rule book and you are supposed to follow this rule book. It's very rational. You're solving problems. It's not about the end justifies the mean. It's actually the complete opposite. We must always treat others as ends and not as means. So everything that you do is meant to be the right. So you're supposed to follow the rules for the right way of being. And so again, there's universal principles that you're supposed to follow. Everybody is supposed to believe that this is the correct way to do something because rationally, based on reason, this is what would make sense for each individual person. And finally, virtue ethics. So in this theory, we're integrating intellect, practical reasoning, and individual good. Now, you're looking at virtues, essentially. The problem with this is that it focuses on the individual that's doing the act versus focusing on the act themselves. So again, kind of like egoism. It's about you and your virtues and what makes you, or what decisions are you doing ethically. But it's in healthcare, we don't care so much about you, the individual, like, oh my God, you're the best radiation therapist. It's about you have to do this because it's your duty, it's your obligation, it's your job to put the patients first. That's why they're here. They're relying on you. They're putting their health in your hands. It's not about you being the most kind radiation therapist out of all of them. It's not about your virtues. It's about the way you deliver that care to the patient. All right, and then now we're going to talk about the models for decision making. So first we were talking about the ethical models, so different types of theories, sorry, not models. We were talking about different types of theories, and now we're going to talk about the models of how you apply these theories. So analytical engineering model, this is more, it's like a scientist that deals with facts. It illuminates the human aspect of patients. This isn't something that we would see very much in healthcare because we don't think of patients as like a tumor. We don't say like, oh, this is a lung, so I'm going to go in and irradiate it, and you're going to have to bring your arms up, and you're going to have to hold your breath for 5 minutes, and I don't care otherwise. No, we have to take the patient into consideration and their limitations and what they, and their autonomy. You have to think about what they want. The priestly model, so the caregiver is seen like a god, and the caregiver kind of dictates everything. That's again not really what we practice here, because again the patient has autonomy. The patient is able to form part of their care. In a priestly model, the patient has no say, and the doctor or their caregiver, or yes, the doctor or their caregiver, healthcare professional, is basically going to tell them everything that they're going to do, and the patient is going to have to be okay with it. Again, not, and this is the reason why this patient is giving this provider that right, is because they have knowledge, so it's like, oh, you're the doctor, you decide, you tell me what I need to do. We see this a lot. Like I come from South America. In South America, it's a little bit more of a priestly model where the doctor said I have to do it, I have to do it. We don't practice that so much here in the United States. The patient definitely has more of a say, more autonomy. And we don't just say like, oh, just because you went to school for XY amount of years, it makes you the person to dictate how I should live my life. No, and my desires and my needs are also going to be taken into consideration. Contractual model, so this is the business relationship between a provider and a patient, kind of like informed consent. The doctor says, hey, I'm willing to do this and this and this and this, and this is what's going to come out of it. Do you agree? The patient says, yes, I agree. Or the patient says, actually, I want to do it kind of like what you said, but I want to do this instead. And you both sign, you both agree. There you go. It's a contract. And finally, the covenant model, understanding between the patient and the healthcare provider that is based on values and goals. So I love this one. This is the one, this is where it's not always covered by a contract. This is where the patient sees you and you see the patient, and without having to say anything, you are both acknowledging that you're going into this with the intention of the healthcare provider practicing beneficence, practicing non-maleficence, practicing justice, practicing emotional intelligence, all those things that we already talked about. You're going into this non-contract relationship where you are expecting the healthcare professional to practice all those ethical views or all those ethical practices. And it's almost like an agreement, an unspoken agreement that lies between the patient and the therapist. That's my favorite of them all. And which two do you guys think fit our roles as radiation therapists? Well, the contractual and the covenant, for sure. All right, let me pause. All right, so the book goes over Dr. Kubler-Ross's stages of grief. First is shock, then we have denial, anger, bargaining, depression, testing, acceptance. This happens in a curve like that. So shock is usually at the middle. Then you go down to denial, patient, and this is in basis of like a patient's emotions. So denial, just down, down, down. Then you jump up to anger. You feel like life isn't fair. Why did this happen to me? And this is, we're talking about a cancer diagnosis. So first, you hear you have cancer, shock. Then you're like, no, this can't be. It's not happening to me. Then you go into anger. Once you finally accept, realize and you say, fine, I have cancer, but I can't believe I have cancer. I've been eating healthy all these years, or I've been doing everything right, or I'm only, 20 years old. Why did this happen to me? Then you start to say bargaining, and you say, well, and again, the emotional roller coaster kind of dwindles down a little bit. You say, well, what if I look into this, or what if I look into that? Depression, of course, is when it starts to hit you. You kind of get overwhelmed with all of the negative parts of this situation. It kind of hits you like a brick wall, and you realize it. And then testing, you're searching for realistic resolutions to the problem. So bargaining, I'm so sorry. Bargaining is when you're trying to find a way out of a situation. You're like, nope, I'm going to have to just do something else. And this is kind of when you jump to extremes. Depression, it's like, hold on, I can't escape this. I can't just pretend that this isn't happening. This is happening. Testing is when you're like, all right, this is happening. I'm ready to find a solution. And finally, acceptance, you're coping with the situation. And again, moving forward. Advanced directives. So when we're talking about this, the patient has been diagnosed, or anybody with any sickness, any situation, they decide that they have to think a little bit more about what's going to happen once we near the end with this type of disease, for example, cancer. So the decisions that concern the future are made by individuals in the event that they become incompetent or unable to give or withhold consent. So it's basically you saying, hey, I know what I want. Again, autonomy coming in. I know what I want. I know how I want my life to be to end essentially, or how my last days should be, and this is what I want to be done. It allows the terminally ill patients to die with dignity because you get to have a say. um, so you have the two types of advanced directives. You have the living will, or I guess you've got, yeah, there's three we can talk about. The living will, so you're competent, you're perfectly healthy, or mentally, you're all there, and you're saying, hey, this is what I want to happen in the event that something, I'm not able to make a decision for myself anymore. You follow the living will. The do not resuscitate order, that is an order that a patient signs when they decide to withhold cardiopulmonary resuscitation. So if a patient has a DNR, you have to abide by it, and it basically says that the patient does not want to be resuscitated if they stop breathing or if their heart stops. And then the durable power of attorney, it allows the patient to designate any willing individual to be his or her surrogate. Of course, you have, certain stipulations to that, but basically you say, hey, in the event that I cannot decide for myself, my husband will decide for me, XYZ. Hospice. So hospice care, it provides medical care and support to the terminally ill patients and their families. So it helps the dying patient have a full life. It offers hope, it offers comfort, and a suitable setting for a peaceful, dignified death. This is usually only offered to patients that have 6 months or less to live. And then the services that are provided, you have nursing that comes to your house. You can have oxygen. You can have certain beds installed. You have counseling. You have spiritual support, and you have palliative care. You have a lot of you can have narcotics, medications, whatever you need to make sure that your last days or last months or last months of your life, you are at peace and that you feel comforted and supported through these last days. All right, so now we're going to talk a little bit about the legal terms, so the medical legal terms. So we have something called criminal law, and that's kind of like when you commit a crime, you go through misdemeanors, you go through felonies. That's not what we're talking about today. We're going to actually talk about civil law, so non-criminal activities. The main one we're going to discuss is tort law. So this is when a wrongful act is committed against a person or their property, so personal injury law. This can be unintentional, so you unintentionally hurt somebody, or intentionally hurt somebody. Intentionally hurt somebody, those are the ones where you end up losing your license. Unintentional, you can also lose your license depending on the degree of it, but a lot of the times you might have some kind of insurance that will cover that. And then the terms that your book goes over. So you have assault, which is kind of the threat. Learn this. It's a threat of touching in an injurious way. So you don't have to touch somebody to assault them. You have to threaten them, or the person has to feel threatened. Battery is when you actually touch the person, you actually do a harmful, unconsented contact with the patient. False imprisonment, so the intentional confinement without authorization of a person, which physically constricts another with force, a threat of force, or continuing confining clothing or structures. So kind of when you put restraints on a patient. You have to be this very thin lines that we're talking about here. When you touch a patient to set them up on the table, you have to tell them, I'm going to touch you. Is it okay if I lower this gown? Is it okay if or you have to walk them through the whole process, because they can come to you with any of these. They can say, hey, you didn't say you were going to touch me there. Why are your hands suddenly there? Like, I didn't agree to this. I didn't consent to this. Or if you tape a patient down and you don't say, hey, listen, we're going to put a little bit of tape here to make sure that your leg doesn't, go off the side of the table. If you just do it, the patient might feel it false imprisonment. Libel is written defamation of character, and oral defamation of character is slander. So when you talk bad about somebody, that's slander. When you write something bad about somebody, that's libel. And then invasion of privacy, it's basically if confidentiality has not been maintained. So again, a breach of confidentiality if you talk about something personal or medical decision or even their diagnosis in front of a family member that wasn't aware, that's an invasion of privacy. Finally, negligence. The neglect, so the omission of reasonable care or caution. So neglect doesn't mean that you did something wrong. It means that you did something wrong knowing that there was a correct way of doing it. So you neglected to do the correct thing. You chose to do the wrong thing. Kind of like that. And this is kind of where malpractice kicks in. So an act of negligence after a contract to provide reasonable care. So if the doctor says, or not even the doctor, if the patient says, oh, I agree to radiation therapy because you are saying that you test these machines every day and that you make sure that the dose it delivers is correct. And then one day you don't do your quality assurance and the machine malfunctions and it harms the patient in some way, that's malpractice. That's you didn't do your job right. You chose to cut a corner. We signed a contract that I was safe under your care. So now it's a malpractice claim. How to prevent malpractice. All right. Competence. You got to make sure that everybody's properly trained. You guys as radiation therapy students will be completing a ton of competencies on a bunch of different setups, a bunch of different types of treatments, different types of machines. We want to make sure that when you graduate this program, you are competent. Number 2, compliance. Are you being certified by the correct registry? You know, ARRT or ASRT, and then for the doctors, are they board certified? Things like that. Compliance. Also, the hospital. Are you keeping up to your standards for safe care? And there are different types of organizations that follow compliance in a hospital setting. Charting. You got to make sure you write everything down, everything the patient ever states to you, or everything that you ever do for the patient, or how much dose is delivered, at what time, or when did they call. You want to chart everything. Charting is your friend. It protects you from miscommunication. Again, communication. You got to communicate. You got to communicate everything that you're doing, everything that's happening. You need to make sure that you're saying it out loud. You need to make sure the patient feels comfortable. Nothing gets lost between the lines or in communication. Confidentiality. You got to make sure you're practicing HIPAA at all times. Courtesy. Say everything nicely. There's no need to be rude. And carefulness. You have to be able to pay attention to the details. There's no rushing. There's no rushing involved when you're talking about a patient's health and about them trusting their health in your hands. Be careful. Take your time. Be sure before you make a decision that you can't take back. All right, risk management. We're almost done here, guys. So risk management is the process of avoiding or controlling the risk of financial loss to staff in the hospital. So every hospital has a risk management department. They're in charge of making sure that if something bad happens, they are informed so they can be prepared for any potential repercussions, or if anything bad is about to happen or anything bad could potentially happen, you inform risk management. They're in charge of finding risks or finding potential areas of mistakes, or a mistake is going to happen here if we don't fix this. That's their job, risk management. Why? Because poor quality care results in risk of injury to the patients and to the staff, and then it increases the financial liability on the hospital. So if you see a door that is really heavy and it keeps kicking the patient on their way out, you probably need to get that door fixed because it's going to cause the patient to fall one day. Incident reports are basically what we as employees fill out anytime that an event not consistent with the routine care of a particular patient happens. So when an event happens, you have to report it, and it's called an incident report. It could be that something did happen and did cause harm to the patient. Sometimes it doesn't have to cause harm to the patient, but it's meant to be kind of like a learning experience, and it's meant to help the hospital and staff identify, is this a process that is broken, or is this a mistake that just one person made? The most common incident report in radiation therapy is falls. Patients fall. Patients are elderly. The majority of the time, patients are weak. They're immunocompromised. They are not essentially at their 100% when they walk into our department. So it's very common to see falls. Then there's something called patient liability insurance. This is something that the hospital has, and it covers the physician, staff members, and employees of hospitals. So if you were to harm a patient in some kind of way, or if the physician were to harm a patient in some kind of way, there is something called patient liability insurance that the hospital does have. For you guys, I believe the school has it, but basically it does protect you up to a certain extent. And the role of the radiation therapist in risk management, you need to follow the policies and procedures of wherever you work, or you guys as students, you need to follow your rule book. You have to be aware of safety issues. So anything that you see that could be a potential safety issue, you have to report it. Report hazardous conditions. Report doors that are not functioning right. Report tiles that are broken. Report ceiling tiles that are coming out. Report lights that are not turning on. And you have to educate the public. You have to constantly make sure everybody's aware. Hey guys, be careful. The floor over there is wet. Or hey guys, be careful. That toilet isn't working. Those are all things that you need to make sure that you are informing everybody so that you're avoiding potential risks. And finally, medical records. Medical records is what chronologically documents the care and treatment that is rendered to the patient. So this is their chart, essentially. Some places still use paper charts. Most places only use EMR now, so electronic medical records. It basically the patient chart has an information sheet, it has their contacts, it has their physicians, their referring physicians, their medical oncologists, their surgeons. It has a history and physical, so basically the history of the patient, of when their disease started, pathology reports, lab reports, imaging reports, surgical procedures, photographs, medications, everything is in this patient chart. And for the radiation therapy aspect of the medical record, you are talking about your setup instructions, the treatment logs, the actual plan itself, the progress reports, which is basically when the doctor sees the patient once a week. All of that is documented in their medical record. And it is a legal document that it is admissible in the court of law, so you have to be very careful what you put into it. You want to make sure that everything that you put into it is accurate. There are ways to amend things in the medical record, but you also have to be mindful of what you're putting in there, because it is a legal document admissible in the court of law. You can't just go in there and say, oh, this patient always smells bad. That's not what is meant to be in a medical record. So you have to be very, very mindful of the things that you put in there, but you also have to make sure you document everything. So again, wording is key. And that's it. That's it for this week. I'm sorry that it was such a long presentation. I will be going over these terms together with you guys in the live session. Thank you guys so much. Have a great evening.